Hi, I'm Chad with Move Forward Guitar. This lesson is from our course Music Theory 1. All the lessons for this course are free on our YouTube channel, so you can follow right along with the playlist, or you can look in the description below for links to the rest of the lessons. To accelerate your learning though, I highly recommend that you download the corresponding workbook and eGuide. To learn more about the workbook and eGuide, click the link on the screen or look in the description below. Welcome to Music Theory 1, Lesson 2. This is part 1 of 2 where I'm going to talk about the layout of the fretboard. Although music theory is the same for all instruments, we're talking about guitar. These are guitar lessons, so I'm assuming you're a guitarist. So I really want to make sure that everything we do is based on the actual guitar and you can visualize it so that it's very practical for your use. So again, on your screen is a fretboard diagram. And I touched on this in the last lesson, but I want to go over it a little more in depth in this lesson and a little bit more on the anatomy of the guitar. And again, if you don't know this stuff, it might help to go and watch our beginner courses, but I'll try to cover as much as possible as we're going through. So again, just to make sure you're 100% sure, this is your fretboard, and this is your 6th string, this is your 1st string, which means that this is your 5th, 4th, 3rd, and 2nd string. And this is your thickest string, meaning it's going to sound the lowest, and this is your thinnest string, and it's going to have the highest pitch. So if you're holding your guitar, this string right here is what would be closest to your face. You would be looking down at your guitar like that, and that can seem confusing because I'm drawing an arrow that's pointing up, telling you that's what you'd be looking down at, but that's how it would be when you're looking at fretboard diagrams. Almost anytime you come across a fretboard diagram, this is what it's going to look like. So this is important for you to grasp this now so you can quickly look at them and know what you're looking at. And then down here would be where your headstock is. So it would be down here, that's where your tuners are, the name of your guitar is down there. Up here would be the body of your guitar. So if I was to play a note down here, it would sound lower than if I was to play it on the same string up here. So down here is lower, up here is higher when you're talking about one string. And the guitar can be confusing because you can go up in pitch going this way, but you can also go up in pitch going this way. So that's one thing that makes understanding guitar a lot more difficult than for a piano, for example. A piano is just laid out all horizontally, and if you played a note down here, struck a key, it would be lower than if you played a note up here and struck a key. You don't have any dimension going vertical. Everything's horizontal on the piano. But on guitar you have horizontal and you have vertical. And we'll really dive in and explain that as we go through. But for now, just realize that about guitar. And that's one of the things that makes it difficult for people when they're trying to memorize all the notes on the guitar, because it's easy to see the notes laid out on one string just like it would be on a piano. But then when you start going vertically towards the other strings, it can be confusing about why they land where they do. But don't worry, we'll really dive into that as we go along and it'll all make sense to you eventually. For now, it's just important to understand how the guitar is laid out and the basic anatomy of it. So I also mentioned that these are your fret wires. Right here would be what's called the nut on your guitar. So either look that up or watch our beginner courses if you don't know what that is. But all these other vertical lines are your fret wires. And then between all your fret wires are your frets. So if I was to say the 5th fret, I'd be talking about right here, because that would be 1st fret, 2nd fret, 3rd fret, 4th fret, 5th fret. So right here is your 5th fret. And then these are the fret wires on either side of your 5th fret. And these little dots here are what are called your fret markers, and those look different on different guitars. The most common way you'll see them are as dots like this, and they represent your 3rd fret, your 5th fret, your 7th fret, your 9th fret. And then you're going to usually come across a double type marker in your 12th fret. And your 12th fret's really important and we'll talk about that more in the next lesson. And we'll talk about these markers in the next lesson as well, and how they're actually just mimicking what's going on down here. So it's something really important to memorize as you're learning guitar, that your first marker is your 3rd fret, your second marker is your 5th, your third marker is your 7th fret, and your 4th marker is your 9th fret, and then your double marker is on your 12th fret, so that when you look at your guitar, you can quickly visualize that and know where you are. Even if you're not on a marker, if you're right here, you could see that you're in between these two markers, and it just makes it easier to visualize. Not all guitars have markers on the actual fretboard, but they usually have them when you're looking down on this part of your guitar, not on the string, but on the edge of your guitar, on the edge of your fretboard. But the majority of guitars do have fret markers on the actual fretboard and when you're looking down at the guitar, so they're easier to see. And I've mentioned the fretboard over and over again, and your fretboard is just this part of your guitar, and that's easier if you look at it on the actual guitar. And again, watch our beginner courses if you need more information. Now, the other important thing to know when we're looking at these diagrams are these open circles. So anytime you see these open circles that are not on top of your fretboard, you can see they're outside of the fretboard on the left, those are your open strings. So anytime I were to strike any open string, they're represented by these open circles. So if I struck the 6th string, this is representing that. And that'll make sense as we go through and become pretty clear to you really quickly. And then anytime you see a filled in circle, not an open one, not a white one, you'd see a black one, or sometimes I'll use colors to represent different things. Those are actual fretted notes. And fretting a note is when you push down a string and strike that string. So if I was to push down the string, the 6th string in the 3rd fret, and strike the 6th string, that would create this note right here, which is called a fretted note. And this is a horizontal diagram, as if you're looking down at your fretboard like this, but you're also going to come across vertical diagrams, and you've probably seen these a lot if you play guitar at all, because these are used for chords all the time, usually a lot smaller diagram and without the dots. But this is the same concept, it's just now this is your 6th string and this is your 1st string. And then everything stays the same. These are still your fret wires, these are your frets, these are your strings. You can just see we've taken this diagram and flipped it up to stand straight up like this. And then these would be your open strings. So these would be your open strings, these would be fretted notes, and this fretted note, I'm just showing it on the 3rd fret for now on the 6th string, but they could be anywhere. You could have a fretted note there, there. Any place in any fret on the fretboard, on any string, you can have a fretted note. Now the next important thing to understand, because you're going to hear it all the time, and it's really important in music in general, is what's called a half step or a semitone, and then a whole step or a whole tone. And a half step in Western music is the smallest, what's called interval that you can have. And we'll really dive into intervals later, don't worry too much about that. But just realize it's the smallest movement you can make, which is from one fret to the next fret. So if I was to play a note here, and then play this note one fret above, that's the smallest distance between notes that I can have in the actual 12-tone system. You can, when you're talking about guitar, bend the notes out of tune and get in between these two notes. But when you're talking about the musical alphabet and moving along in the musical alphabet, this is the shortest distance that you could have from one fret to the next fret. So that's called a half step or a semitone. Your next distance that you can have is what's called a whole step or a whole tone. So that's when you start in one fret and skip a fret and then go to the fret after that. That's called a whole step. So whole steps have one fret in between them. So a half step is the smallest distance you can have. A whole step is the next smallest distance that you can have, which is actually just two half steps put together. So if I had a note here and a note here, this would be a half step, and then from here to here would be a half step. So that would equal a whole step. And again, you'll also hear whole tone. And that's the same if we're talking about from an open string to the 1st fret, that would be a half step. So on the 6th string, if I played this 6th string open, and then I played this fretted note in the 1st fret on the same string, that's a half step. Or if I skipped a fret and went to the 2nd fret from the open string, that's called a whole step. And you can see it's just the same distance, it's just these notes aren't actually landing on your fretboard. And it doesn't matter what strings you're on, half steps are going to look the same. They're always going to be 1 fret apart, even if you're starting from an open string. Any open string to the 1st fret is going to be a half step when you're talking about on the same string. Same with whole steps, it's going to look the same no matter what string you play it on or where on the fretboard. They're always going to have a fret in between them. And we're really going to dive into this more in upcoming lessons, but that's an important thing to understand because you'll hear half step and whole step all the time. So if you were to look at the musical alphabet or the A chromatic scale on the 6th string, you could see from A to A sharp or B flat is a half step. A to B is a whole step. Or if I went from B to C, that's a half step. B to C sharp or D flat is a whole step. No matter what note you start on, that's always what it's going to be. F to F sharp is a half step. F to G is a whole step. No matter what string you're on, you're just going to find these notes repeated over and over again. A to A sharp would be half step. A to B is a whole step. Half step, whole step. And sometimes it can help to visualize this on a piano since, like I said, it's easier to visualize since it's all just laid out horizontally. Anytime you strike a key, if I was to strike this A and then go to the very next note, which there's a note in between A and B, you either have A sharp or B flat. If I was to strike this note next, right here, that's a half step. Or if I was to strike this note first and go to the very next note, that's a half step as well. And that's just going up. You could go down as well. From here to this A is a half step as well. It doesn't matter if you're going up or down. And then from A to B is a whole step because you have this note in between that you're skipping. And then again, between B and C and E and F, there's no sharp or flat. So that means going from B to C is a half step, and going from E to F, or vice versa, is a half step. So no sharp or flat in between those notes, so that means they're half steps apart. Same on guitar. B to C, there's no fret in between them, there's just a fret wire, so that's a half step. E to F, there's no fret in between them, just a fret wire, that's a half step. So that's an intro to the fretboard layout. In the next lesson, we're going to dive even deeper into fretboard layout. Look in the Music Theory 1 workbook for step-by-step guidance on how to retain this information and what to do next. And remember, all the charts and diagrams are in the Music Theory 1 eGuide for you to reference anytime.